They boarded with hope, but the sea became their grave. Mothers pressed their babies close to trembling chests. Children's laughter echoed through frozen corridors. Unaware these would be their final hours, a captain stood at the helm, his hand steady, his heart heavy with a secret dread he couldn't name. The night was deceptively calm, too calm. Then it happened. A deafening explosion ripped through the steel belly of the ship. Screams pierced the Arctic silence. The lights flickered, then died. In the suffocating darkness, thousands of souls realized there was no escape. Icy water flooded the decks within seconds. Families were torn apart. Hands reached out in desperation, grasping at nothing but frigid air. Children called for mothers who would never answer. Within 18 minutes, over 9,000 lives were swallowed by the merciless Baltic Sea. More than the Titanic, more than the Lusitania, more than any maritime disaster in history. Yet, you've probably never heard of this. Wasn't an accident. This wasn't a storm. This was the MV Wilhelm Gustloff. And what happened that night in January 1945 was the deadliest, most horrifying tragedy the sea has ever witnessed. A tragedy the world chose to forget. When the MV Wilhelm Gustloff was first conceived, it wasn't built for war or tragedy. It was born out of pride, a floating symbol of power and perfection. Constructed in the Blohm & Voss shipyard of Hamburg, Germany, in 1937, the ship represented the height of German engineering. At 684 feet long and painted in a pristine white hue, she was designed to shine, a beacon of national prestige gliding over peaceful waters. She was named after Wilhelm Gustloff, a prominent political figure of that era, turning the ship into more than just steel and rivets. It became a moving monument. Inside, marble floors, grand dining halls, and sunlit decks promised a voyage of luxury to thousands of working-class Germans under the Strength Through Joy program, a campaign meant to show that even ordinary citizens could experience grandeur. For a brief moment, the Wilhelm Gustloff delivered on that promise. She hosted smiling families, echoing laughter, and music drifting through her halls as she cruised the Baltic Sea, her hull cutting gracefully through calm waters that seemed endless. But beauty can be deceiving. Beneath her polished decks and national pride lay a destiny she could never escape. The same ocean that once carried her triumph would soon claim her entirely. A ship once celebrated as a symbol of joy would one day become a tomb of silence. As the world plunged into war, the proud white silhouette of the Wilhelm Gustloff began to fade beneath the shadow of conflict. The laughter that once filled her corridors was replaced by silence, and her luxurious lounges turned cold and empty. In 1939, as the Second World War erupted, the ship's destiny shifted, no longer a vessel of joy, but a tool of survival. The German Navy commandeered the Wilhelm Gustloff, transforming her from a cruise liner into a floating hospital. Her grand ballrooms became wards lined with iron beds, and the faint hum of jazz was replaced by the echo of boots and whispered prayers. Doctors and nurses worked tirelessly as wounded soldiers filled her decks. Men who had once dreamed of victory now clinging to life, but her purpose would change yet again. As the war neared its bitter end, Germany's front collapsed under Soviet advance. Panic spread through the cities. Thousands fled westward, desperate to escape. In this chaos, the Wilhelm Gustloff was assigned one final mission: to evacuate refugees, soldiers, and naval personnel across the freezing Baltic Sea. Once a ship of leisure, she now carried the weight of fear, hope, and desperation. Her decks overflowed with families, soldiers, and children, some clutching what little they had left, others staring silently into the night, knowing they might never return. The transformation was complete. The ship that once symbolized national pride had become a vessel of survival, sailing into a future no one could predict. January 30th, 1945, the night the Wilhelm Gustloff began her final journey. Snow fell gently over the port of Gotenhafen, now called Gdynia, Poland, as thousands of desperate souls crowded the icy docks. The Baltic wind howled like a warning, but no one could afford to listen. For the 10,000 refugees, soldiers, nurses, and crew on board, this ship was their last hope of escape. Mothers held children wrapped in blankets, their breaths visible in the cold. Soldiers stood silently, staring out toward the endless dark sea. The decks were so overcrowded that families slept in hallways, engine rooms, and lifeboats that were never meant for this many. Every corner of the ship told a story of fear and fragile hope. At 12:30 p.m., Captain Friedrich Petersen gave the order to depart. The engines rumbled to life, pushing the ship slowly away from the frozen harbor. The Wilhelm Gustloff moved steadily into the night, her once white hull now dull and battle-worn. On the bridge, tension ran high. Two captains, Petersen and Marine Officer Wilhelm Zahn, argued over the safest route. Should they sail close to shore, risking mines, or move into deeper waters where Soviet submarines lurked? After heated debate, they chose the open sea, a decision that would seal their fate. By evening, the ship was wrapped in darkness. Inside, the passengers tried to forget the war for a moment. Some shared bread, others whispered prayers. In one cabin, a mother sang softly to her child, her voice trembling with exhaustion. Down in the engine room, sailors listened to the creaks of the steel hull and the hum of the turbines, unaware that death was silently closing in. Outside, the temperature dropped below freezing. Ice crystals formed along the railings. The sea was unnaturally calm, too calm, almost as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. Then, at 9:00 p.m., a chilling message crackled through the radio. Reports of an enemy submarine spotted nearby. But the warning came too late. The ship pressed on through the black void, unaware that within the next hour, history would record one of the greatest maritime disasters ever known. The night of January 30th, 1945, was cruelly silent over the Baltic Sea. The Wilhelm Gustloff, once a proud symbol of luxury and strength, now carried the weary faces of over 10,000 souls. Soldiers, nurses, mothers, and children, fleeing the advancing Soviet army. The air outside was bitter, nearly -15 degrees, and the sea below whispered with unseen danger. Inside the ship, people huddled close, whispering prayers, clinging to the fragile hope of survival. But beneath those dark waters, a predator watched. The Soviet submarine S-13, commanded by Captain Alexander Marinesko, had been tracking the ship for hours. At exactly 9:04 p.m., 3 torpedoes left its tubes, slicing silently through the frozen sea, each one carrying the weight of thousands of destinies. The first struck near the bow, ripping open the forward compartments. The second torpedo slammed into the section housing hundreds of young women from the German Naval Auxiliary, a place that had once been a swimming pool for luxury passengers. The third exploded near the engine room, killing power instantly and plunging the vessel into total darkness. Panic spread like fire. Screams echoed through the metal corridors as water rushed in. Mothers clutched their children. Soldiers tried to force open sealed hatches, and crew members shouted orders no one could hear over the chaos. The lifeboats were frozen solid in their davits, impossible to release in time. On the tilted decks, people slipped, fell, and disappeared into the Black Sea. Within 20 minutes, Wilhelm Gustloff began listing sharply to port. The few lifeboats that managed to launch were immediately overwhelmed by desperate crowds. The sea, cruel and indifferent, claimed hundreds within minutes. Hypothermia, setting in faster than fear could fade. The air was filled with cries that soon turned into silence. By 10:00 p.m., the mighty ship was gone. The Baltic swallowed her whole, leaving behind only fragments, floating wood, torn life jackets, and the echoes of human despair. Out of more than 10,000 souls on board, only around 200 survived. The rest, over 9,000 men, women, and children, vanished beneath the ice-cold surface in one of the greatest maritime disasters in history. As the waves settled and the night returned to stillness, the sea held its tragic secret. A secret of lost dreams, unanswered prayers, and voices that would never be heard again. When the Wilhelm Gustloff disappeared beneath the icy Baltic, the world above had no idea of the horror that had just unfolded. The few lifeboats drifting through the darkness carried not just survivors, but witnesses to an unimaginable tragedy. Frozen, silent, and half dead from the cold, they floated among the wreckage as snow began to fall, covering the sea like a shroud. Hours later, faint lights appeared on the horizon. German rescue vessels TF-19, Löwe, and Gotland arrived to pull the survivors from the freezing waters. Most were unconscious, their skin pale blue, lips stiff, eyes wide open in disbelief. Some mothers were still clutching their lifeless children, refusing to let go, even as rescuers pried them from their arms. Out of more than 10,500 souls, only 1,239 were rescued. The rest, over 9,000 people, were lost forever. The sea became their grave. In the days that followed, the Nazi government downplayed the disaster. Propaganda officials feared the truth would shatter the already crumbling morale of the German people. Newspapers printed small, vague notices: a transport ship lost in enemy waters, with no mention of the scale of human loss. Survivors were told to remain silent, their grief buried under the noise of war. Yet for those who lived, silence was impossible. Many spoke of haunting nightmares, the sound of children crying in the water, the glow of the ship's lights fading beneath the waves, the faces of those left behind. The trauma followed them for decades. Some survivors could never again look at the sea without trembling. After the war, the Wilhelm Gustloff was largely forgotten by history, overshadowed by the enormity of the global conflict. There were no monuments, no ceremonies, no grand memorials. Only the families of the lost kept the memory alive, whispering their names into the wind, as if hoping the sea itself might listen. The world may have moved on, but beneath the waves, the ship still slept, carrying with it the frozen echoes of that night, when humanity's desperation met the sea's indifference. Decades passed, and the Wilhelm Gustloff remained hidden beneath the cold, gray waters of the Baltic Sea, silent, untouched, and forgotten by most of the world. It wasn't until years later that divers finally discovered her resting place, lying 44 meters deep off the coast of Łeba, Poland. Time had transformed the once grand vessel into a ghostly monument. Layers of rust covered her hull, and corals grew where passengers once walked. The name Wilhelm Gustloff was barely visible, but the ship's shape was unmistakable. Her bow resting on the seabed, her decks twisted, windows shattered, corridors filled with silt and silence. Divers who visited the wreck describe an overwhelming feeling of sorrow. They say the ship feels alive, as if the souls of those who perished still linger within its walls. Some have claimed to hear faint echoes, the creak of metal, the whisper of the tide, sounds that vanish the moment you turn your head. Today, the wreck is officially recognized as a war grave, protected under international law. No one is allowed to disturb her. No artifacts may be removed. No exploration beyond respectful observation. She lies there in eternal darkness, a time capsule of human tragedy and forgotten war. For historians, she stands as a chilling reminder of what desperation and war can cause. For families, she is sacred ground, a silent memorial beneath the sea. And for the rest of the world, she remains one of history's most haunting shipwrecks, a tragedy swallowed by the waves, but never by time. The story of the Wilhelm Gustloff isn't just about a ship, it's about people. Innocent lives caught between war and survival, their dreams buried beneath an ocean that still whispers their names. Today, she rests in silence, but her story speaks louder than ever, reminding us how fragile peace can be and how deep the scars of war truly run. If this story moved you, don't let it sink into history's depths. Like, share, and subscribe to Sea Tragedies to keep those lost voices alive. Join us next time as we uncover another haunting mystery from the deep.